just any rock band. They were giants of the late 1970s and 80s, selling over 80 million albums worldwide. Formed in Pasadena, California by two Dutch-born brothers, Eddie and Alex Van Halen, the group's explosive sound and stage antics made them superstars. But Van Halen's lineup didn't stay the same. Over the years, 8 people were part of the band: the Van Halen brothers, Eddie on guitar, Alex on drums, David Lee Roth, Michael Anthony, Sammy Hagar, Gary Kyron, Wolfgang Van Halen, and even an original bassist named Mark Stone. Each played a role in the band's story. We'll find out what each member did after leaving Van Halen or after the band ended. No gossip or drama, just real stories, the triumphs, struggles, and where they are now. They once ruled rock with electrifying guitar solos, wild vocals, and energy that shook stadiums. Van Halen was a band of legends. But whatever happened to its 8 members, from the blazing virtuoso guitarist to 3 very different lead singers, each member's journey took surprising turns. Stay tuned as we uncover where Van Halen's 8 members ended up after the spotlight faded. Number 8. Eddie Van Halen was the heart of Van Halen, a guitar hero who reinvented how rock guitar is played. Fans were awed by his lightning-fast solos and the famous two-handed tapping technique on songs like Eruption. Eddie's custom red, white, and black guitar, the Frankenstrat, and big grin on stage became iconic. He formed the band with his brother Alex and drove it to global fame. By the time Van Halen's classic album 1984 came out, Eddie was a bona fide rock superstar, and Guitar World magazine later ranked him the greatest guitarist of all time. In the 1990s and 2000s, Eddie faced some tough battles. He struggled with health issues and addictions, yet he kept making music. In 2007, he reunited with original singer David Lee Roth for a hugely successful tour with Eddie's teenage son, Wolfgang, now on bass. It seemed Van Halen was back on top. They even released a new album, A Different Kind of Truth, in 2012. Tragically, Eddie spent much of his later years quietly fighting cancer. He mostly stayed out of the public eye, aside from spectacular concerts like the Van Halen 2015 tour, which turned out to be their last. On October 6, 2020, the world received sad news. Eddie Van Halen died at age 65 after a long battle with throat cancer. His death marked the end of an era, closing one of rock's most colorful sagas. The outpouring of love from fans and fellow musicians was enormous. Eddie's legacy lives on through his groundbreaking music and his family. His son, Wolfgang, carries the Van Halen musical torch today. Though Eddie is gone, he's remembered as a guitar legend who changed rock music forever. Number 7. Alex Van Halen. Behind the drum kit, Alex Van Halen was the driving beat of Van Halen. He's Eddie's older brother and co-founder of the band, known for thunderous drum solos and the iconic big grin he shared with Eddie on stage. Alex stayed with Van Halen through every era, from the backyard party days in Pasadena to the sold-out arena tours. If Eddie was the flashy guitar hero, Alex was the steady engine keeping the rhythm roaring. Alex is a private, family-oriented person by nature. He avoided the media limelight whenever possible, even during Van Halen's fame. After the band's last tour in 2015, Alex largely stepped back from public life. In 2020, when Eddie passed away, Alex was hit extremely hard by the loss of his little brother. He described feeling oceanic grief that completely shut him down for a time. In the years since, Alex has kept a low profile. Now, in his early 70s, he's had to deal with some health issues of his own, including a serious spinal injury in 2022 that temporarily affected his ability to walk or play drums. Thankfully, Alex recovered enough to start practicing on drum pads again. Despite rumors that he might retire, Alex insists he's not done with drumming. In fact, he said, "I'm not quitting. I'll die with sticks in my hand." That quote says it all. Alex's passion for music is still alive. However, Alex has not returned to the stage or launched any new band projects since Van Halen ended. In 2022, there was talk of a special Van Halen tribute project, possibly with Eddie's guitar hero friends. Alex and singer David Lee Roth even rehearsed a bit for a tribute tour idea. But disagreements, including how to honor Eddie on stage, caused those plans to fall apart. Alex chose to bow out rather than continue without the right tribute for his brother. These days, Alex Van Halen lives a quiet life out of the spotlight. He hasn't joined former bandmates Sammy Hagar or Michael Anthony on their projects, turning down invites to Van Halen tribute shows that didn't feel right to him. 6. David Lee Roth. Often called Diamond Dave, was Van Halen's original frontman and the ultimate showman. With his high-flying kicks, wild blonde hair, and loud personality, Roth, in the late 1970s and early 80s, defined Van Halen's party-hard image. On stage, he was full of jokes and energy, whipping crowds into a frenzy. Off-stage, he was known for his colorful quotes and adventurous spirit. Roth fronted Van Halen during their classic era from the 1978 debut album up to the mega-hit 1984, and helped propel the band to start him. However, by 1985, tensions were brewing. Roth pursued a solo project and left Van Halen to do his own thing. He launched a successful solo career in the late 1980s, scoring hits like California Girls and Just a Gigolo. In those years, Roth was everywhere, making music videos where he dressed like a crazed surfer or cowboy, touring with a band of top-notch players and proving he could headline on his own. But the road eventually got bumpy. By the 1990s, the shine of Roth's solo act had faded, and music tastes changed. Ever the restless soul, Roth tried many new adventures. One of the most surprising things David did: he became an EMT, emergency medical technician, in New York City in the late 1990s. Yes, Diamond Dave riding ambulances. He trained as a certified paramedic and reportedly went on over 200 ambulance calls by the early 2000s. Roth said helping people on 911 calls made him feel grounded and proud. It's not what you expect from a rock star, but it shows Roth's unique character, always looking for the next experience. Roth never stayed away from music too long, though. In 2007, he reunited with Van Halen, with Wolfgang Van Halen on bass, for a hugely successful tour, reminding everyone how electrifying he still was on stage. He then toured with the band again through the 2010s, including Van Halen's final tour in 2015. In 2020, after Eddie's death, Roth hinted at retirement. He even announced a farewell Las Vegas concert residency for early 2022, saying, "I am throwing in the shoes. I'm retiring. These are my last 5 shows." However, those shows were canceled due to the pandemic, and Roth's retirement didn't stick for long. Fast forward to today. David Lee Roth, at age 70, just can't stop performing. In 2023 and 2024, fans noticed Roth releasing new song versions and appearing in online videos. Then in 2025, he officially returned to the concert stage. In May 2025, Roth made a surprise comeback at the M3 Rock Festival in Maryland, belting out Van Halen classics for the first time in years. He had so much fun that he announced a whole summer tour, 13 shows across the U.S., where he's performing the songs that made him famous. Roth joked on stage that this was the end of my first retirement. Clearly, the showman in him is alive and well. Number 5. Michael Anthony was Van Halen's reliable bassist and high-harmony vocalist. In the classic lineup, Michael stood to the side with his bass guitar, shaped like a bottle of Jack Daniel's whiskey, smiling as he laid down the bass lines and sang those famous high-backing vocals. Think of the high notes in Panama. That was Michael. He joined Van Halen in 1974, replacing Mark Stone just as the band started its climb. For 3 decades, Michael was the quiet secret weapon of Van Halen's sound. Michael's exit from Van Halen was a bit bittersweet. Around 2006, when Van Halen was planning a reunion with David Lee Roth, Michael was replaced by Eddie's son, Wolfgang. Michael hadn't had a chance to contribute to Van Halen's 2004 songs, and suddenly found himself out of the band he helped build. But Michael didn't let that stop him from doing what he loves, making music and having fun. He soon teamed up with former Van Halen singer Sammy Hagar, who was one of Michael's closest buddies in the band. In fact, Sammy and Michael have been inseparable since 1986, and as of 2025, they've been rocking together for almost 40 years. Michael joined Sammy's supergroup Chickenfoot in 2008, alongside guitarist Joe Satriani and Red Hot Chili Peppers drummer Chad Smith. They released albums and toured with Michael's big grin and thunderous bass present on stage again. Later, Michael also became part of Sammy Hagar and the Circle, a band where he and Sammy jam on a mix of Van Halen hits, Sammy's solo songs, and classic rock favorites. Michael has been living the good life touring with Sammy. They genuinely have a blast on stage. You can see that their friendship is like brothers. In June 2025, Sammy celebrated Michael's 71st birthday by posting photos of them, rocking out together in the 80s, and now writing, "Me and my brother have been doing it and enjoy it as much today, maybe more than ever." Michael replied with a heart emoji, showing, "The love is mutual." Together, they affectionately call themselves the Other Half, as in the other half of Van Halen's classic lineup, and they keep Van Halen's spirit alive by playing the old songs for fans. In recent tours, like Sammy's Best of All Worlds shows and a Las Vegas residency, Michael and Sammy cranked out Van Halen classics, much to the crowd's delight. Outside of music, Michael Anthony is known for being one of the nicest guys in rock. He's an avid hot sauce enthusiast, too. He even markets his own hot sauce called Mad Anthony's. These days, Michael is healthy, jolly, and still hitting those high notes in songs. While he's no longer in Van Halen, he often says he's grateful for the years he had with the band. Number 4. Sammy Hagar. When David Lee Roth left Van Halen, many doubted the band could find an equal replacement. Musician Mr. Sammy Hagar, nicknamed the Red Rocker, who became Van Halen's lead singer in 1985. Sammy was already a successful rock singer. He had a hit, I Can't Drive 55, and had fronted the band Montrose. With his powerful voice and down-to-earth charisma, Sammy led Van Halen through 4 consecutive #1 albums. The band's sound evolved with Sammy, more polished anthems like Why Can't This Be Love, and Van Halen stayed on top. Sammy's era lasted from 1985 until 1996, and even included a brief reunion in 2004. After finally parting ways with Van Halen, Sammy's life took a turn that most rock stars can only dream of. He found huge success outside of music, too. So, what happened to Sammy? First, he kept rocking. He continued to release solo albums and then formed Chickenfoot and later The Circle with Michael Anthony, as mentioned. He's still touring and singing into his late 70s, full of energy with his signature shock of curly red-blonde hair and a big smile. In fact, Sammy performed at major festivals and events in recent years, and even reports from 2025 show him jamming on stage at things like the Stagecoach Festival, alongside other rock legends. He loves to play Van Halen songs live with Michael Anthony, giving fans a taste of the Van Hagar days. But one of the biggest chapters in Sammy Hagar's post-Van Halen life is business. Sammy proved himself as savvy and entrepreneur as he is a musician. In the late 1990s, he founded Cabo Wabo Tequila, named after his nightclub in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. The tequila took off, and Sammy eventually sold 80% of the company in 2007 for a whopping $80 million. A few years later, he sold the rest for additional $1 million. It turned out Sammy made more money from his tequila than from any single Van Halen album. This success allowed Sammy to do music purely for fun. He also launched a rum brand, opened beach bar restaurants, and wrote a best-selling autobiography. Despite all his ventures, Sammy's heart still belongs to music and the fans. He's known for his sunny personality, always quick to laugh and bring positive vibes. Sammy and Eddie Van Halen were estranged for a long time after their 2004 reunion went poorly. But there was a touching note. Before Eddie died in 2020, Sammy reconnected with him and they patched up their friendship. Sammy expressed relief and love that they made peace. Today, Sammy Hagar is around 75 and still going strong. He often says he'll keep rocking as long as his voice holds out. He even has a new project called The Best of All Worlds, where he and Michael Anthony celebrate Van Halen's music live. Since Alex Van Halen chose not to participate, they do it on their own terms. Sammy refers to this not as a tribute band, but as a celebration for fans who never got to see some Van Halen eras live. Number 3. Gary Chiron. Might be the least-known Van Halen singer, but he has his own dedicated following. Gary joined Van Halen in 1996 as the band's third lead vocalist after Sammy Hagar's departure. He was previously the frontman of the early 90s rock band Extreme, famous for the ballad More Than Words. Joining Van Halen was a dream come true for Gary, but it was a challenging time for the band. The album Van Halen 3, 1998, with Gary on vocals didn't reach the usual Van Halen heights, and some fans were unsure about the new sound. By 1999, after one album and tour, Gary Chiron left Van Halen on friendly terms, and the band went on hiatus. Gary went back to what he knew best, making music with Extreme. In the early 2000s, he returned to his hometown Boston area and started a project called Tribe of Judah, exploring a new sound and even releasing an album. But soon enough, Gary rejoined his old Extreme bandmates. Extreme had broken up in the mid-90s, but they began reuniting for one-off shows by 2004. By 2007, Extreme was officially back together and working on new material. In 2008, they released an album titled Saudade de Rock, marking a solid comeback. Gary Chiron has mostly been off the mainstream radar, but he never stopped performing. He's an example of someone who just genuinely loves music for music's sake. He's toured in various smaller projects. For instance, he fronted a Who tribute band called Slip Kid for Fun, and even joined the Joe Perry Project with Aerosmith's guitarist as a lead singer for some live shows in 2022 to 2023. But Gary's main focus remained Extreme. In 2023, Extreme released a brand new album called Six, their sixth studio album, as the title suggests. The album got rock fans excited, and videos of guitarist Nuno Bettencourt's solos even went viral online. Gary, as Extreme's singer, went on tour again with the band, delivering high-energy performances, much like he did in the late 80s and early 90s. Gary has occasionally reflected on his Van Halen stint without regret. He said that he's proud to have been one of the three singers in the mighty Van Halen. You can't take that away from me. And indeed, he's part of the band's history. Though his time with Van Halen was short, Gary stayed friends with the Van Halen brothers afterward. He even jumped on stage with Sammy Hagar and Michael Anthony a few times in the mid-2000s to sing old Van Halen songs for fun. Nowadays, Gary Chiron is in his early 60s and still belts out songs with passion. He keeps a low profile personally, often letting the spotlight shine more on Extreme's flashy guitarist. But fans know Gary as a humble, hard-working musician. 2. Mark Stone. Mark was Van Halen's original bass player in the band's very early days before they were famous. He played with Eddie and Alex Van Halen when the group was still forming in the early 1970s. In fact, back then, the band wasn't even called Van Halen yet. They went by names like Genesis and then Mammoth. Mark Stone was there jamming in backyard parties around Pasadena, helping shape the band's sound in those formative years. Why wasn't he part of Van Halen's later success? Mark's time in the band was short. By 1974, just as the Van Halen brothers and David Lee Roth were pushing harder for a record deal, Mark Stone was let go from the band. He was replaced by Michael Anthony, whose higher vocal harmonies and full commitment fit the band's needs better. Mark was a student at the time, a very good student actually, and he found it difficult to keep up with the band's all-or-nothing pace while also focusing on school. I was a straight A student, and basically I couldn't keep up with them, Mark admitted about his split from Van Halen. The band asked him to leave, and though it was painful for Mark, he later said he understood why. He knew Van Halen was destined for something big. "Don't leave before the miracle happens," Mark said, and I did, acknowledging that he left just before Van Halen exploded onto the scene. After Van Halen, Mark Stone stepped out of the fast lane of rock. He continued his education and led a more low-profile life. He would occasionally pop up in the Van Halen fan community, giving an interview here or there about the early days. In a documentary called Van Halen: The Early Years, Mark reminisced about playing in garages and tiny venues with the young Van Halen brothers long before fame. He seemed content with his place in music history, even if it was a footnote. In recent years, Mark's name surfaced in Van Halen news one last time, sadly. In September 2020, Mark Stone passed away from cancer. It was just a couple of weeks before Eddie Van Halen also died, both in fall 2020 and eerie coincidence. Mark was in his mid-60s, his brother announced the news, and fans paid respects to this forgotten member of Van Halen. Many only then learned of Mark's contributions to the band's early development. Number 1. Wolfgang Van Halen. The last and youngest member on our list is Wolfgang Van Halen. Wolfgang is Eddie Van Halen's son. He literally grew up around Van Halen's music and backstage atmosphere. As a little kid, Wolfie, as they call him, would watch his dad and Uncle Alex play, and by age 16, he was an impressive musician himself. In 2006, Eddie invited Wolfgang, just a high schooler then, to join Van Halen as the new bassist, replacing Michael Anthony. Fans were skeptical at first, but Wolfgang proved himself on the 2007-2008 reunion tour with David Lee Roth. He held his own on bass and brought a fresh energy, even singing background vocals like Michael used to. Wolfgang played on Van Halen's final studio album, A Different Kind of Truth, 2012, and toured again with the band in 2012 and 2015. He essentially gave Van Halen a new spark in their later years. But when Eddie fell ill and the band became inactive, Wolfgang started focusing on his own music. So, what is Wolfgang doing now? He has stepped out from his father's shadow and launched a successful solo career. In 2021, Wolfgang released his debut album under the band name Mammoth W-V-H. The W-V-H stands for Wolfgang Van Halen. Interestingly, Mammoth was the name of Van Halen's band before they were called Van Halen, a cool nod to his family history. But the music Wolfgang made was all his own style, a mix of hard rock and modern influences, not just a copy of Van Halen. Even more impressive, Wolfgang played every instrument and sang every vocal on the album by himself in the studio. When the album came out, it was a hit in the rock world, debuting at #1 on Billboard's Top Rock Albums chart. One heartfelt song, Distance, was a tribute to his dad Eddie, and it earned Wolfgang a Grammy nomination. It was clear that Wolfgang had serious talent in his own right. Now, Wolfgang Van Halen is forging his own path. He shortened his band name simply to Mammoth in 2025, but it's the same project. He released a second album, Mammoth 2, in 2023, continuing to play all the instruments on record and proving that the first album's success wasn't a fluke. He's been touring with a live band where he focuses on singing and playing lead guitar and winning over fans who may not even be aware of his Van Halen lineage. Wolfgang deliberately does not fill his concerts with Van Halen covers. He wants to build his own legacy. Though he did honor his dad by performing 2 Van Halen songs on a big stage at a tribute concert in 2022, stunning everyone with how well he nailed Eddie's guitar parts.